New Chumash. We are starting Parshas. We are starting both Parshas Vayikra and Chumash Vayikra. Okay. So, what page? Shani, do we have a page number? 545. When I grow up, my next life, in my next life, I'm going to be South African and have a cool accent instead of being from Brooklyn. Okay, so
I'm gonna be British.
Which
one, like a chav?
I have no idea.
She's the London version of Sarah.
Yeah, that's what we want. We want the Pasha version.
What? Me? Yeah, because she's got an English.
Okay. Okay, ladies, we ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting a new Chumash first of all, and this Chumash and the Parsha have the same name. It's called Vayikra. In the good books, it's yeah. Like it's sourced someplace in the Talmud. I don't know exactly where it is, so I just give it the good books. I mean, when I make things up, I tell you when to make things up. Oh, sorry, did not know that. Okay, sorry, not in the good books. In the Talmud, we call this book Chumash Vayikra, and it's actually not called that in the Chumashim as we know them are not called by those same. They're not called by those same names in the Gemara and other early sources, early Jewish sources, just to confirm that that one. And the Chumash Vayikra is called Teiras Kohanim. Now, if you were to look at all of the Torah Kohanim, the Torah of the priests, okay. Now, if you
entire book or
the whole book, no, Chumash Vayikra, we call it Leviticus. It's in English, Vayikra in Hebrew. In the Talmud, it's called Torah Kohanim, the book of the Torah for the priests. Now,
actually refer to it as that.
In the earlier days, like this has become the more common name for the book, but in the earlier sources, that's what it's called. It's called Torah Kohanim. Question. Okay, we never did this?
No, I never heard of the other.
Oh, okay.
I would remember this.
Okay, fine. So we're gonna. I think we can turn off the heater about now. I just stood up and got like a wave of heat, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so we have like this Bereshit. We never did it. I can't believe it. Okay, Bereshit, which means what does Bereshit mean? In the beginning, right? In what's the English name? Genesis.
I do not know the English.
Genesis. And we don't have another marker, so here we are. Genesis. No, yellow's not gonna work. We're not gonna be able to see it at all. Okay, and it's also called. Stick with me.
Sorry,
Sefer HaYashar. The book of the upright. The Yashar, right? Direction, straight. But HaYashar is this image, standing straight. Bereshit, which in English is called Genesis. It's not called the beginning book. Genesis is in English, what does it mean as a word? It means the foundational beginning of something. So Sefer HaYashar actually matches Genesis much better than Bereshit, because it talks about all those people who walked upright with God, the Adam and Chava and Noah and Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov. It talks about our beginnings, okay? The book of Shemot, which we know means, what does it mean? What is Shem? Shem, name. So Shemot is a book of names, okay? But in English, it's called Exodus. And in the Gemara, it's called Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. Are we seeing a pattern over here?
Yeah.
Are we seeing a pattern over here? Yeah, we definitely, I don't think we did it this year, but I definitely done it before. Okay, now here we are. We are here. Chumash Vayikra. What does Vayikra mean? And he called Va, and yeah, he kara called, and he called. And what do we call it in English? Leviticus. I may or may not be spelling it correct. And in the Gemara, what did we say it's called? It's called Torah Kohanim. Okay, Leviticus is Latin for belonging to the priests, which again is matching our Gemara name for the Chumash better than our regular name. Then we have Bamidbar, Bamidbar, which means what is it?
desert?
In the desert, but what's it called?
Is it Kohanim or Kohanim?
Kohanim. Oh,
Sorry.
it's okay. No, it's okay. Kohanim. I'm so glad that you were able to even read any of my scribble over here. Okay, Bamidbar, what's it called in English? Numbers. And in the Gemara, it's called Sefer HaPikudim, which means the book of counting, right? The book of counting. So that numbers, what am I showing you is that whoever did our translation really had a lot of information. They weren't just working with the text. And the last book that we have is the book of Devarim, which is called
Deuteronomy.
was it? Yeah, Diva. Okay, I'm just adding more letters, random. It's the book of Deuteronomy, which I for sure cannot spell correctly. I'm telling you now. It's off. I don't know.
You want me to spell it? I'm looking at it.
Is it DEA?
D-E-U.
Okay.
T-E.
What's it? DEUT what?
E-R.
Oh, I would not have gotten that.
Okay.
Yeah. The end I got Deuteronomy. Okay. And in the Gemara, it's called Mishnah Torah. Mishnah. From the word. What do you see in the Hebrew? What do you see? Root, Mishnah. Can't really write that. Mishnah Torah means the repetition of the Torah, and Deuteronomy means that. A duo, right? We know it has the root of two. So Deuteronomy is the repetition of the Torah. In the Gemara, it's called the Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah.
That stands for Hapikudim.
Hapikudim. Yes. Okay. Whatever. Now, these books 1, 2, 4, and 5 all have very distinct time frames. Just to finish this up, the book of Bereshit starts from creation and it goes until I think about 2200 approximately. Okay. The book of Shemos, the book of Exodus, covers the Jews coming down into Egypt till their exodus from Egypt. So it's going to go from, again, about 200. Somebody who wants to crack the math could do it better than me. It goes from about 2200 to 2448. That's the year the Jews leave Egypt. Biblical years we're talking about. Vayikra has no time frame. Bamidbar is going to talk about the time in the desert. So it's going to go from 2448 to 2488. It's going to cover about 40 years. And when we come to Bamidbar, we're going to talk about the fact that it doesn't actually cover 40 years. It covers about 2.5 years, because it really could be, Rivka Marga's subtitle for it is Jews in Transition. That's the book of Bamidbar. It talks about us moving out of slavery and into being people for God, and then being desert dwellers into going into Eretz Yisrael. So in those two ends of the 40 years, which is about 2.5 years, we have a lot of strife, we have a lot of upheaval, and the time in the middle, we hear nothing. We heard nothing about the Jews apostrophe, right? We don't hear anything about the Jews apostrophe life in the desert. Very little. We don't know what their daily schedule is like. We don't know anything. And now Mishnah Torah is said, it's Moshe's, I have to say Moshe because I don't have to say Moses's. Moses is
Moshe works.
right.
Moshe.
Moshe's last swan song to the Jewish people. He starts speaking on Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Rosh Chodesh Shvat in the year 2488, and he keeps talking until the day of his passing, which is the 7th of Adar of the same year. So this book covers 37 days. So if you take a look, as history is coming much more particular to the Jewish people, it's slowing down and getting much more focused on them. Notice that Vayikra doesn't have a timeline, but what Vayikra does have is this spine. What supports the stories on this side and the stories on that side? The laws in the middle. Vayikra is, as a book, has the most laws for the Jewish people. And really that is what bolsters up our whole stories on this side and stories on that side is the place, can we stand tall and strong with God? And we do that with mitzvahs, not only with stories, even though we do learn from stories, but we very much do it from mitzvot. So here we are, Chumash question.
What's the end date on that?
It's 7th of Adar. Yeah, the 7th of Adar. So here we are, we're at Chumash Vayikra. Chumash Vayikra, as I said, does not have a time frame. It's a lot of laws that Moshe is going to give. Now, if you zoom out for a second, first of all, Chumash Vayikra, it's one of those books that strikes fear in the heart of the learner, because there are so many laws in there, and there's very little story. There's a couple of stories sprinkled through, but by and large, it is just laws and laws and laws and laws and laws. And so for those of us who like the story part of Torah, the laws part of Torah is a little bit, we need to brace ourselves for this. But what's interesting is that the Medrash says, we talk about this book, and it is referred to as the book, like we said, it's called Torah Kohanim, but it's also, they say that Yavo Tahorim v'yasku b'tahara, that those who are pure should come and learn and deal with tahara, with purity. And really, it's been like one of those Jewish customs for hundreds and thousands of years, is that children who start to learn Chumash, who are called Tehorim, the pure ones who've never sinned, the first thing that they learn when they start learning is Chumash Vayikra. Now, they don't go through the whole Chumash. Most of them will learn a few verses to kind of make that connection between pure children learning and the purity of Torah. If you zoom out to Chumash Vayikra as a whole, you're going to see that it's going to cover purity in all strata. So the first thing we're going to talk about, the first two Torah portions, a little bit afterwards, talks about sacrifices, which we're going to get into because it's a very weird conversation. We're going to talk about, so it starts with sacrifices, which is the purification, the connection. We'll get to sacrifice in a second. After that, we're going to talk about purity within the animal kingdom. We're going to have long lists of those things that we can eat and those things that we cannot eat. Most of Parsha Shemini is going to deal with the laws of kosher and the list of what animals are and aren't. And then after that, we're going to talk about purity within the human being, different types of forms of spiritual impurity that come on a person, male and female, and how we deal with that. And again, like I said, there's a couple of stories sprinkled in between. I want to say one thing about purity, because we were talking yesterday about Christian influences or whatever. You say impure and you feel the connotation or the subtext says dirty, bad, no good. In Judaism, purity and impurity means accessible to holiness or not accessible to holiness. Can I come in a world that was very temple centric? Could I come to the temple? That was a question of purity. There was no judgment call if somebody was in a state of impurity. There was no obligation to live in a state of purity unless you were in fact a Kohen, because then you had to, all the things that a Kohen ate had to be done, well, the gifts that he got had to be done in a state of purity. But this notion of purity or impurity as a judgment call, I feel, is a very Christian influence that we have. So I want to put out that we have a whole book talking about purity and impurity. It is not a judgment call. It's a question of accessibility to holiness or not accessibility to holiness. And again, one of the things we're just coming up to Pesach, and we were talking about, we had Parshas Par and all those things. People in temple times did not walk around, most of the people did not walk around all day in a state of purity. They were farmers in the Galilee or wherever they were, I made that up, and wherever they were, and they had no need to come to Jerusalem. They had no access or no need to come to the temple. It didn't matter if they came in contact with the dead or any other form of impurity. They could, when it was time for Pesach and everybody had to come and bring the Passover sacrifice, that's when we started reminding people, Para, you need to become pure, you need to be able to be accessible to holiness, because if not, you can't come to the temple. There were, of course, in Judaism, not everybody does everything the same way, and there were always people who were much more careful about their state of personal purity and where they ate and what they ate. They tried to stay as much as possible only in that realm of accessible to holiness, but there was no actual injunction to do that, as I said, except for Kohanim, because Kohanim, no matter where they lived, were eating holy stuff. If I, who is not a Kohen, would bring my challah, right, the little challah that we burn is just a memory of the challah that was given to the Kohen when we gave challah, they had to eat that challah in a state of purity. So they couldn't, unless they said, sorry, I can't take your challah today, like, their lives very, very much revolved around them staying in a state of tahara, as we call it in Hebrew, which is accessibility to.
They were never able to become impure.
The reverse, I would say. They had an injunction to stay tahor, to stay pure.
Does that mean they were constantly going to the mikvah?
Yes. One of the things, how do they know archaeological find? How do they know when they find a house? I don't know. I'm not a Kohen. I'm not married to a Kohen. I don't know the laws. It's not so practically applicable in our life today. But we know the fact that Kohanim's homes very often had a mikveh. That means this was something that they were doing on a daily basis. Now we know today mikveh going for men does not have halachic significance. So it's more custom that's happening. But then they used to actually make a bracha, and it had halachic significance. Tahor and
Sorry, the glare I had to.
Got the angle? Don't judge my spelling, I could be wrong. Okay, now with that, by way of introduction, can we get into our Parsha for a little bit? Okay, let's open. Thank you. Okay, so Vayikra, here we are. I want everybody to look into your Chumash because this beginning is going to be very, very important because the majority of the Parsha is going to talk about sacrifices, and I do want to talk about sacrifices. But before, Does somebody know? Oh, we're going to talk about sacrifices, but I want to try to keep this in some sort of order of what's going on. But the first thing that you can't possibly miss, unless they didn't print it that way in your Chumash, is that the word Vayikra. Take a look at the word Vayikra. What do you see? What do you see on the actual word in Hebrew? Okay. On top of the aleph. What else are you going to notice about the aleph? It's very small. Okay. Vayikra in the Chumash, and that little tiny aleph is not just a typo in all of our Chumash, in all of our Chumashim. It is in fact the way it is written. And we're going to talk about that for a second. Now, what is the difference between if we had the aleph or we didn't have the aleph? What is the difference between Vayikra and Vayaker? Because if you take off the aleph, you would have Vayaker. Okay, Vayikra is it's an expression of love, and it's an expression of connection. I called you. Here, it's really not I. Hashem calls to Moshe, and the connotation is one of love and connection. When Hashem speaks to Bilam, who's the most famous non-Jewish prophet, the expression that he uses is Vayaker, that he appears to him. And to me, the easiest way to differentiate this is Vayikra is when I have something to say to you and I call you on the phone. Anybody remember calling on the phone, not just texting people? I call you on the phone and I say something that I was thinking about you. I have something nice to say, even if I have a question, but I called you on the phone and I spoke to you. That's Vayikra. Vayaker is when I bump into somebody in the shul, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I saw you. I have something to tell you. That is not the same relationship.
You said Hashem to
Bilam? So Hashem, when Hashem spoke to Bilam, he used the expression Vayaker. It's as if we just bumped into each other and I'm going to give you a message. It doesn't show any kind of special love. And the sages tell us that when Hashem is dictating to Moshe and he says, right, Vayikra el Moshe, that Hashem calls to Moshe in his humility was taken aback by that term of endearment. And so he writes a small aleph. And remember we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it here, when Moshe comes down from the mountain and his face is shining. I don't know if we talked about it here in class, but a little bit we spoke about it. His face,
The light.
Yeah, the light. So the sages say, where did that light come from? And they say it's that the rest of the ink of the aleph that Moshe wrote small, that he sort of kind of like, if you absentmindedly, rub your head or something, got some of that spiritual ink on his forehead, and that gives him a spiritual glow. And Hashem says, you can't take away this relationship. You can't take away the Vayikra relationship that I have with you. You're in your humility, you're uncomfortable with that, give me a small aleph. But the Torah wants to very, very clearly state that the relationship between Hashem and Moshe is one of Vayikra. And the other thing that I want to add is that Vayikra is written in singular form. And really, 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 this book, we're opening up a new book. And the book is Hashem reaching out to each and every one of us. and saying to us personally and individually, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be connected to you. I want you and me, let's go on a date. Let's get some coffee. Let's hang out. Let's spend time together. And the word that is used is Vayikra. We have this, Hashem says to each and every one of us, I have these things that I like. I have these things that I don't like. I want to have a relationship with you. Could you please be part of that? So the Vayikra is not only a lesson to Moshe, but I think it's a special calling out to each and every one of us. Hashem wants to be connected to us. Hashem wants to have a relationship with us. He Vayikras us. I don't know if that's a real word, but now it is, right? But now it is. So the first thing we have to say is that this whole book that we're opening up is opening up with Hashem calling out and speaking to us and saying, I want to have a relationship with you. And there are things that I like that you don't understand, and there are things that I don't like that you don't understand. Could you do it? Could you please? Just get that, we know, and it's so true when you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't understand why they do like that flavor of ice cream, or they don't like that kind of, because you think it's just amazing, but you're willing to humor them because you're in a relationship with them. And that's what Hashem is really saying to each and every one of us, not just you and me, but be involved in this relationship on the terms that are good for me, not just on the terms that are good for you. And that's really where Vayaker is going to be opening up. Okay, and what are they going to talk about? He's going to talk about, Pasuk Beis says, speak to the Jewish people and say to them, Adam ki yakriv mikem karban laHashem, a person from amongst you who brings a sacrifice to Hashem, whether it's from the behemoth, from the bigger animals, from the buckers, domesticated animals, whether it's from sheep. I'm not a farmer, so all of these kind of blend together. We don't have, all different kinds of things that we could talk about. And then it's going to go into discuss every single one of the sacrifices. But I do want to point out one thing before we get into the actual sacrifices, that the Chassidus points out that that the wording in verse 2 is weird, right? Juliana, if you were going to not spell check it, if you were going to grammar check it, how would you speak to the children of Israel and say to them, what does it say in English?
What a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, from the cattle, from the blood, you bring well.
Okay, so the actual Hebrew says that, doesn't say when a man, it says when a person, it says a person who wants to bring from you an animal, right? They already fixed up the grammar over there. So the Hebrew.
It's like saying, then colon.
Yeah. It's a little bit awkward. It's right. So one of the things, exactly. Could we switch those words around? Could we say that when a person from amongst you wants to bring, that's how they translate it. When a person from amongst you wants to bring a sacrifice, what the Hebrew actually says is when a person wants to bring a sacrifice from amongst you. Who was just saying about, throw grandma off a train or something? Like the grabber, all those grammar geek jokes. And what Chassidus highlights to us is that in this whole conversation of sacrifices, the first thing that we have to actually know is that it has to be mikem. It has to be something from amongst me, from within me, that I'm giving to Hashem. It's not just I have a sin and I want to get atonement. I'm going to take some animal and I'm going to slaughter the animal and I'm going to walk away scot-free. The first question, mikem, is this coming from within me? Am I identifying? Am I seeing this? Am I part of this? But within, we've all learned, am I able to sacrifice some of the things that my animal says I have to do, I must do, I always do it this way? Can I say I could do it differently? And that's really phraseology, because it's not really awkward in English. As a sacrifice, it's not just take an animal to the temple and you're done. No, it's soul searching. It's a real coming together of many, many, many worlds. And we're going to get to that in a second. So the first sacrifice we talk about is what's called an Ola Sacrifice. It's an animal. It starts off, there are different options of what the animal that we could bring. We could bring a large animal, we could bring small animals. You could actually even bring birds or flour if you don't have enough money to buy a cow.
No fish, right?
No, we don't bring fish. But you could bring. They have pigeons or doves are the birds that they had brought us, that were commonly brought as sacrifices. And if that was too much for you, then you could bring a meal offering, which is all different kinds of fine flour. There were many, many different ways of preparing it, depending on the sacrifice that you're bringing. All those were up for grabs. Question.
When you say pigeon, I'm assuming.
Not the ones.
You can't just grab one off the street. That has to like.
No, you can't ever do a mitzvah with something stolen. You can't, the principle is you can't do a mitzvah through an avera. So that's a question, like I was walking with my husband once. We were in Gan Soccer and they have rosemary plants there. And we were having a conversation. Could you pick the rosemary in Gan Soccer and use it? So then we got the whole conversation. Like if we were in the botanical gardens, this was not halachic. This is just our the Gan Soccer seems to be like a park for everybody. You want to take some rosemary, you're not going to uproot the whole plant. You're going to take a little bit. It's not going to really harm anything. But if you were in the botanical gardens, you couldn't do that. Even if you're going to say it's a massive rosemary plant, and what's little sprig going to do? They're not going to even know. So take it back. That's considered stealing. You're not allowed to take it. Right. So right. That's what we're saying. So Gan Soccer, it feels like it's hefker, it's ownerless, and then you can take it. The question of buying, first of all, I don't know that pigeons were such a nuisance or available like they are.
Well, they used to be. They were like originally domesticated for use, and then it wasn't until really recently that we stopped doing that.
Right.
Like, no, they're like, you eat pigeons. They're like wrapped with wings. Like we right. They brought them as sacrifices. They brought them as sacrifices. Pigeons are kosher?
Yes. I don't know which ones. I'm sure there are pigeons that are kosher, pigeons that aren't kosher, and a lot of things that have to do with birds have to do with tradition, because they don't actually have signs. They don't have fish. They don't have fins and scales. They don't have split hooves and chewing their cuds. So they go by signs. So I would not know to say that pigeon is kosher and that pigeon is not kosher. I don't even know if there are differences in pigeons. Like I said, this is not my forte at all.
With your discussion about the Ram Soccer thing, idea. It's what's technically owned by the city. I'm assuming the city of Jerusalem, the city.
Right, because we pay taxes. We pay taxes. It's kind of ours.
Kind of yours.
Correct. So that was our sort of end conversation. We felt like from Gan Soccer we could take. You obviously can't take off a whole plant or whatever, but like within normal use, taking a little bit of rosemary wouldn't be. We didn't think it would be out of the question. That was kind of where we sat with that one. We didn't. No, we didn't. Just because it was more of an academic conversation than a practical. Oh, should we take it or not? It was just sort of like, oh, because there are very few plants that I can actually identify. Rosemary happens to be one of them. So that's how the whole conversation came. Because I could, there's rosemary in the park. Can we take? That's kind of how that conversation developed. Okay, so I want to say a couple of things about the karbanos that we have over here. So first of all, there were different kinds of sacrifices. The Ola sacrifice that we talk about first is one that is wholly burnt, a WHOLLY. It is completely burnt to Hashem. People would bring it for different kinds of different things. You could bring it for if you did some. There's also something called a carbon chatas, which we're going to hear later on, which is a sin offering. But you could also bring an ola for a. You could also bring it as a sin situation, but also as a gift to Hashem. Sin offerings in general, you can only bring a sin offering for a sin that you did inadvertently, which is a nice word of saying by mistake. It's a sin that's done inadvertently. That, had you done it intentionally, would have the punishment of karet, which means being killed by Hashem, dying before your time. So such a sacrifice could be such a sin that you did. You could bring a sacrifice. So it's interesting. The Talmud says, like, what does it mean? I did a sin by mistake. Like, what does that even mean? So they give the example of there being two. Okay, our diets don't really lend ourselves this way, but the Talmud tells us that what if you were in a room and there were two pieces of fat on the table and you ate one of them? Now, we don't usually eat straight fat, but You ate one of them, and later on you found out that one of those pieces of fat came from what's called chaylev. There are parts of the fat that were offered as sacrifices, and therefore you're not allowed to eat them. Even today, there are certain parts of the fat that you're not allowed to eat. And the other one was shuman. It was regular fat that you're allowed to eat, but you don't know what you ate. Two identical pieces of fat. You ate one. So that's that if you that's actually a different. We'll get to that in a second. I made a mistake. The Talmud does give that example. They don't give it for carbon for a sin that you did inadvertently. They actually do it for a sacrifice that you bring. There's something called a sacrifice. It's like on a sliding scale kind of thing. If you knew you did the sin, you bring one kind of sacrifice. If you're not sure you did the sin, and that's the example they give of how you're not sure if you did a sin. Did I eat chaylev or did I eat shuman? Did I eat something that's forbidden or something that's prohibited? Something that's permitted. That sacrifice has to be worth much more than a sin offering, because a sin offering, by the time you get to the sin offering, you know that you made a mistake. You're ready to fess up and repair, and you've done the internal work. And therefore, the sacrifice is like the end of that conversation. I don't know, it's called Ola Sacrifice. I don't know if I did a sin or not. It has to be more expensive to remind you of your proximity to sin is not as far as you're not as far away from sin as you thought you were. Because if you're not sure that you really did something, like, why should I atone for something I didn't actually do? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, I don't know. It could be, it can't be. And so really, the example that the Talmud gives of fat is to remind us that where is our passion? Where is our excitement? Which is what fat is represented by. Where is that lying? And are we so far away from sin as we thought we were? And if you were possibly capable of sin, then you're not as far away as you thought. We all know in our lives, there are certain things we just don't do. Even in the middle of your sleep, you just don't do them. Even when we're really quite not conscious of the whole situation. And there are certain things like we could. I ever tell you about this girl I saw once years ago. It was at an amusement park, and they did a hypnotist situation. Don't tell me it's baloney. I know it might or might not be, but I'm going to be a believer over here because it's such an indelible memory. I must have been 12 years old when I saw this. And the hypnotist does his thing with the girl, and you're sleeping, and he says, okay, you're in a car, and she gets into the car. He says, put your key into the thing, start the motor. And before she started the motor, she reached up and clicked her seatbelt. And I was like, wow, right? That wasn't part of this. Like, it was so ingrained that I am not starting the car if my seatbelt isn't on. Even, okay, we're gonna say she really was hypnotized. Don't give me that skeptical look over there.
I opened it.
So, but that plays of there are certain things we just are not gonna do. And then there are certain things that we're not as far away from sin as we think we are. And to really be a little more careful. You had a question or a comment?
Question.
Yes.
So Gila told us that with the sacrifices, that part of the process is putting your hands on it and
Right.
visualizing each part of it
Right.
as yourself, and that feels is so
Intense.
Yeah. So then if you're doing the flour, what would the process be like with that?
So every single sacrifice that you're going to bring is going to have the same thing. There's a place of the person connecting with the Kohen, connecting with whatever the sacrifice is. So then if it's an animal, you're going to actually put your head on the animal. And what's interesting is I always thought it was like put your head on the animal. It's really not. It's like apply serious pressure to like hold them down. It's not hurting them, but it's like real. It's not like this. It's not like this. It's like this.
Oh my God.
It's real pressure. Yeah. It's like in there.
I
You're really
just like
yeah, right. Yeah. No. I also did until I actually learned about it. Like, yeah, no, that's not what happens. And the other thing that happens that every single sacrifice has salt, which we're going to get to in a second. It has salt, and often they have wine libations that go along with the sacrifices. So we're talking about, we mentioned before about this coming together of worlds of the inanimate, the vegetation, the animal, and the human. It's all coming together here in some very, very deep communion with Hashem. And that it's going to be a really powerful experience. It's not just, it's not a slaughterhouse. It's not just like, whatever, gratuitous killing of animals. It's not what it's about at all. It's very, very much is coming together. And when you say what happens with a grain offering, so first of all, they're going to do the same, putting their hands on it. And there's going to be some sort of handover. And also, there's two different kinds of grain offerings. One is a mincha. There is a carbon mincha that is actually grains. It's really not grain. They take the grain, they either bake it or fry it or deep fry it. It's all versions of matzah that they had in the Beis HaMikdash, not like an edible matzah like we sometimes eat, but like deep. What do they talk about? Is there's a deep frying pan in the Beis HaMikdash that was filled with oil, and the flour water mixture was essentially boiled in oil, so it becomes fluffy-ish, but it's still matzah. I think to me it sounded like a donut, like a big donut, but I don't know. But I'm saying, like, I don't know. So that you have some that are actually flour offerings, and then you also had offerings that I'm bringing flour because that's all I can afford. So when I'm bringing flour because that's all I can afford, I still get the animal part of the pain, because I'm also in that pain because this is all I can afford. And what's interesting, Stam, another random temple factoid, is that the high priest brought a carbon mincha, a grain offering, twice a day. And that was so that people who were unable to bring an animal and were only bringing grain shouldn't feel bad about their sacrifice. Like, look, even the high priest is bringing grain, and they would kind of like, everybody would like join in with his, so that they wouldn't say, oh, like, this is my little bowl of whatever, so that was yeah, you don't feel, not to feel bad about what it is that you're. And one of the interesting things that talks about, of course I didn't mark it in this chumash, they talk about at the end of the day, it doesn't really, let me see if I find it. It doesn't matter what you bring. The question is, how do you bring it? I can't find it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The Rashi talks about that the ikar hakavana, the most important thing is my intent. What am I thinking? Am I thinking I'm getting away with murder and I'm like, sorry, just cutting corners and that's it? Or am I really present when this is happening, when I'm really making this, when I'm bringing this sacrifice, am I really present for that moment and for that experience to be able to be there and to get what's happening, and not just like da-da-da. So it doesn't matter what it is that we're bringing. We talked about a little bit about bringing the donations to the Mishkan, whether they were building the house of God, would bring the tabernacle. Didn't matter what you bring in the free offerings. They weren't saying everybody has to bring gold or everybody has to bring this, but they have to be nediv lev. They have to be giving with a generous heart. They have to want to be there. They have to want to be part of it, and then it's actually going to work, because that's the point. The point is heart. And when we talk about our relationship with Hashem, whatever it is that we're doing, it's better. This is my little rant for today, but it's definitely sourced in stuff. It's better to do less, but to do it really with your full heart, than to do more and say, here's your stinking mitzvah, God. We don't want people to give us a present like this. Hashem doesn't want our mitzvahs like that either. Hashem wants us to be there with our heart and soul. Whatever it is that we're giving, give it nicely, give it beautifully, give it in the best way possible, and that's really the point of what we're talking about. We're not only talking about sacrifices. We don't have a temple right now. We're not bringing sacrifices, but the place of, in our relationship with Hashem, can we do it beautifully? Can we do it with love? Can we do it with care? Or is it just like a scorecard? Yeah, I did this. That then we lost something in the conversation over there. Another thing that I want to talk about in general about sacrifices is that the Ola, we said, is a sacrifice that was totally burnt up on the altar. The other sacrifices had different parts. We have something called a shlamim. It's called a complete sacrifice. Part went to the altar, part went to the Kohen, part went to the owner of the animal. There were sacrifices where part went on to the altar, part went to the Kohen. There's different kinds of sacrifices, but one thing is across the board true, that whatever went up onto the altar of sacrifices, the two components that always were put onto the altar were the blood and the fat. Okay, blood and fat were always put onto the altar. And when we have this conversation, we talk about enthusiasm, we talk about where blood is our life source. Where's my chayas? I don't know how to say that in English. How do you say chayas in English? I don't know. Right? Your enthusiasm, but it's different because chayas and passion are different. Blood and fat are different. No, I don't know. A Google Translate thing? I don't know. Oh, I'm going to vote for an older one. I'm going to vote for an older word. If I know it, it's probably an older word. So the place of blood is the place of my life force. What gets my blood going? What gets me excited? What gets me passionate? But also that place of fat is like, what do I really find pleasure in? Right? I know fat is like probably a very frowned on part of our modern diet, but we all know that that's what actually gives a lot of flavor. That's what gives, real. And that's the question that we have to ask. Of the things that really we're passionate about and the things that really like enrich our lives in such a deep way, can I give of those to Hashem? And remember, we don't give everything. We don't put all the animal, we don't put all the blood, we don't put all the fat, we don't put all of it. But is there a place that I can be passionate in my relationship with Hashem? Is there a place that I could find enjoyment in my relationship with Hashem? That's the sacrifice they're asking us today. We don't have a temple, we don't have a tabernacle, we aren't bringing sacrifices, but in my relationship with Hashem, they're the things that make me who I am. They're my blood. I'm so excited about them. Are those things that go into the category, oh, God wouldn't really understand those. That's a different kind of, that's for the other part of my life. Or do we say, no, the things that I'm passionate about and things that give me life and give me, vitality, those are also part of my relationship with Hashem. So that's my first bracha to all of us, that we identify, if we have not yet identified, the things in our lives that make it worth getting up in the morning and give us excitement, and we look forward to doing them and to being part of them, and to be able to give part of that to Hashem, part of the things that make us so excited to be alive and to be Jewish women in 2021. Can we give part of that to Hashem as well? So that's really my first bracha to all of us. The other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that every single sacrifice had to have salt put on it. Okay, there was a lot of salt put on everything. And there's also, it's at the end of Sheni. If anybody can help me find it, because I saw it when I was doing, or the end of Shlishi, sorry, yesterday. One second. Oh, I'm too far. The end of Shlishi, the end of the third Aliyah. I'm pretty sure that's where it was. Oh, here's about the salt.
13.
What?
Like around
No, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it might be the end of the second Aliyah. 1 second. I definitely saw it here.
It's at the end.
Give me a chapter and a verse.
13.
Verse 2:13. Yeah. There we are. Okay, go. Read. You found it.
You shall salt.
You also found it, Jamie. Sorry.
You may not discontinue the salt of your God's covenant upon your meal offering on your every offering table.
Okay, and that.
Any meal offering that you offer to Hashem shall not be prepared leavened, for you shall not cause it to go smoke from any leavening or fruit cake as a fire offering to Hashem.
Okay, so every sacrifice has two. It has a positive and negative. Within the salt, there's a positive and a negative, but here we have two things. First of all, we're told that you cannot put any kind of leavening agent, no sourdough, on the altar, or honey, any kind of sweetening thing, meaning can't be brought up as a sacrifice on the altar. It was brought to the temple because when we brought the first fruits, we brought honey. That was one of the date honey was one of the 7 fruits of so we had dates. So it came to the temple, but it did not go up onto the it did not go up onto the altar. And the other of putting on salt on every sacrifice and not forgetting to put salt on the sacrifice. So a couple of things. First of all, in our lives, if you ever notice that a suda, any kind of real proper meal that we have, there's always salt on the table. The reason for that is because our sages tell us that a shulchan doma lemizbeach, that our table is like the altar, and the food and the whole eating experience should be holy and should be elevated and should be special. And so therefore we always have salt, just like every sacrifice has salt, we always have salt on our table.
So even when we're not making a meal that we're washing for, should we have salt at the table?
You really should.
Really? Even just like.
No, specifically we talk about a suda where there's bread, where you're washing. We are talking about that. Should you have it on a regular lunch? I don't know. It's not a commandment to. Would it be a nice way maybe to remind us that our table is an altar and we should, be careful how we eat and what we eat? Maybe. Are people going to look at us weird? Maybe.
In America, for example, everywhere you go, there's always salt and pepper
on the tables. Exactly. Or they don't want people to keep asking them for the salt and the pepper. So that's also possible. But yes, definitely the place of our table being like an altar, and so therefore we have salt on our table. The other thing, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I'm segueing for a second. We talk about how today prayer is instead of sacrifices. So we know that there are 3 daily prayers set. They're set every day. You have Shachris, Mincha, and Arvit. You have the morning, the afternoon, and the evening prayer. The first 2, Shachrit and Mincha, are corresponding to the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice that was offered on behalf of all the Jewish people twice a day, once in the morning. When they say morning, they mean really early, like daybreak, not like noon time when we're starting to get our day started. So there's one early in the morning and there's one later on in the afternoon. And so Shachris and Mincha correspond to those, and Ma'ariv, Arvit, corresponds to the fact that sacrifices could continue to be burned throughout the night. Now, in general, sacrifices are very time sensitive. We have the holy, we have holy, we have katshe kalim, katshe katshe, we have different kinds of status. What's the plural of status? Statuses? I don't know. Sacrifices have different statuses. I don't know. It sounds weird. I don't know. Yeah. So in general, ladies, in general, most sacrifices you could eat, whether you could eat for a day and a night. Some you could eat for 2 days and a night. Some you could only eat in the temple grounds. Some you could only eat in Jerusalem. So sacrifices are also very spatial and time sensitive. So especially times where there were a lot of sacrifices being offered on a daily basis. Like I can't imagine what a regular Monday afternoon in the temple looked like, but over holiday season, over Pesach, over Sukkot, when people were coming to be Ola Regel, there were lots and lots and lots. There were always sacrifices going on, but the overflow, they could continue to add and burn sacrificial meat all night long. So that's why Arvit is corresponding to that. But because it doesn't actually match a specific sacrifice, it corresponds to the time of sacrifices being burnt. Therefore, let's say, for example, in Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to add Yalav V'Yov, you're supposed to add part into the Amida. If you forget it by Ma'ariv, by Arvit, you don't repeat. But for Shachar Mincha, you would repeat. So there are slight differences within prayer because of the status of what they're matching up. So that's a side point about prayer and about sacrifices. Okay, and now we're talking, why did they put, so first of all, they put salt because that's what Hashem said. That's the first answer. The first answer is because exactly. So now the question is, why salt and why not honey or sweetener? Why not a sweetener? Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah, in the morning of the sacrifice, we talk about the sacrifice. In the morning, it talks about you're not allowed to put yeast, a leavening agent, or honey on thing. It totally invalidates the sacrifice, and salt, you can't leave it out. And when we talk about sacrifice, take it out of the animals for a second and talk about our lives for a second. I feel like sometimes in a Western culture, sacrifice has a dirty word. That I will do something altruistic for another person where I'm not going to get anything back. That's sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't me selling you something because then you're giving me money. It's not, we each take turns inviting each other for dinner. Sacrifice is when I do something for another person without expectation of payment. And there is this place, I think, I like to blame it all on Western culture, that it's like it has negative connotations. But in Torah, the place of sacrifice is a very, very, very important, I think in Judaism, of doing something for another person is a very special thing to do. And we're told two things: sugar and leaven, no; salt, yes. What's the difference? Sugar and leaven is my experience of the experience. What do I get out of it? Salt, what does the other person get out of it? Because we know what is the property of salt. It brings out in the other. It brings out in the other, in the meat, in the thing. How many people here have ever eaten watermelon with salt? Not me personally, but it's a thing. It's a thing. In Israel, they sell watermelon with Bulgarian cheese. It's that same idea. It's a thing. Salt brings out the best in the other. Now, obviously, if you put on too much salt, then it's inedible, and that's a whole different conversation. But when we talk about sacrifice, when we talk about doing for somebody else, am I doing it in a way that leaves them indebted to me? That's sugar, that's leaven. If I'm doing it in a way of leavening that I'm getting caught up and haughty about a person, I'm not salt to it. I need to do for the other person to help them actualize themselves. What do I need to do to help them be the best version of themselves? So you're right, Rivka. What's the question of salt? The question is in our relationships with each other, with the people we care about, with the people that we don't know so well. Am I doing the things that make me feel good, or am I doing the things that the other person needs? So I want to give us a bracha. This is our last class before Pesach. We're going into our holiday of redemption. First of all, we should all be able to be in a place of redemption, to be able to be in a healthy, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mental place, to be able to be open to redemption and to understand that sometimes our place of redemption is what we do for another person. And that when we do for another person, when we reach out to another person, it should be adding salt into not into their wounds, to be adding salt into their lives, to bring out their flavor, to bring out the best in them, to be able to bring out in them everything that they're capable of doing it. And when we have the ability to do that for another person, that is really, truly redemptive. Have an awesome rest of the day. Have a great week, and have a Chag Sameach. Have an amazing, liberating, and liberated kind of Pesach.
Thank you.
Thank you.